It's a lot of work to do a podcast. I've been doing my podcast for over a year and a half now, and I talk to a lot of other podcasters. I've been to other events. I interview them on my podcast. I'm surrounded by people who are sharing like that. And recently I had a conversation with Justin Schenk. He's got a really successful podcast. He's got over 2 million downloads on his podcast. And he shared some of his biggest advice. He advises people all the time on, how to start a podcast, how to grow on a podcast, some techniques you can use. But really it's all about knowing your why and just keep showing up. And that's what we talk a lot about on the show. It's called WhyInfluence for a reason. WhyInfluence. This channel is sponsored by TubeBuddy. If you create YouTube videos and you do not have TubeBuddy, there's a link in the description to download it and get a free 30-day trial on the premium plan so you can get all the extra perks, and then it bumps you down to the free plan and has a ton of value. I've been using it for years, and I think most YouTubers have it installed. So if you don't have it already installed, use the link in the description. You get 30 days free, and they're sponsoring this video. So thanks, TubeBuddy. But anyway, let's jump into his response because I think it's really valuable and something that you should hear. All right, so let's just start off with some advice. You talk to a lot of podcasters that want to start out and get started. So what's some of your biggest advice for a new podcaster?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things that I want to focus on is number one, if you're going to start a podcast, figure out your why, right? Perfect reason or perfect name for your show. Figure out why are you doing it? Like, I think a lot of people now are jumping into the arena of podcasting because it's the cool thing to do. Everybody's doing it, so I got to have a podcast. Or your friend Mary has said 19 times, you should really have a podcast and talk about that. But figure out what's the reason, because there's a lot of work that goes into podcasts. It takes a while to grow an audience. It takes consistency to grow an audience. So if you can tie it to a why beyond an audience growth, whether it's to make an impact, whether it's to use as a marketing arm for your business, whether it's to whatever, right? Build great relationships. Figure that out first. And then that way you have a goal beyond just, okay, I just need to show up every single week and hopefully somebody tunes in. So I would say tie a why to what you're doing. Give yourself a reason to actually be doing it other than your friend told you to. And then be very, very consistent. Like, show up for your audience, continue to deliver value for them, stuff like that. Because what I realize is people show up, they start a podcast, they think they're going to get thousands of downloads day one, and that's just not the case. And then they'll quit, right? I think the statistic states that 78% of people who start a podcast don't make it past their first 7 episodes. So the realization of the amount of work that it takes versus the return day one it doesn't equal each other. So just tie a why to it.
Isn't it funny how Justin's biggest advice for a new podcaster is to figure out your why? It's really common to hear that someone starts a podcast and then very quickly does not continue the podcast. I think it's really rare for a podcast to pass like 15 episodes. That's a major milestone for a podcast. And it's oftentimes because people don't have a strong enough why. And that's what we talk about here on the podcast. On my show, I interview influencers about why they're sharing. It's great advice. So tie a why to what you're doing. It'll help motivate you to push through to getting started and also push through to continue sharing. A big piece of advice he shared was to be consistent. You got to consistently show up. You can't just create some content and disappear, come back, check on it, and be like, oh, wow, this all blew up overnight. It's not going to work that way. It's very rare to have that happen. You just got to keep showing up, and then eventually you'll have a platform and you'll have a community that's created from it. If you'd like to check out the full interview with Justin, the link is in the description. If you're interested in starting a podcast, I host a weekly meetup for influencers. So if you're interested in tuning into that, Justin actually guest spoke there and shared some of his secret sauce in an intimate setting before coming on as a podcast on the show. So in the meetup, we have more intimate setting and we get some deeper dive informations than what we actually get on this podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Go ahead and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks.